Good evening, friends. It's that time of the week, Wednesday. Material Issues, episode number 103. I'm Mark Hershberger of Pop Detective Records. I'm over here in South Jersey where it's a beautiful, sunny, late afternoon, early evening. Joining me, as always, my good friend over in California, Reseda to be exact, the president of the International Pop Overthrow Festival, Mr. David Bash. How you doing this evening, David?
I'm doing well this afternoon, Mark.
Yeah,
How
I
are
gotta
you
say
doing
this
this
evening.
evening?
Early evening here in South Jersey. It is wonderful. You're in the afternoon. It's a beautiful day here, a little bit breezy, but
Likewise out here. Although we have an uncharacteristic amount of humidity in the air, and they're even forecasting some thunderstorms over the next few days. Something we rarely get. So we'll see if that actually happens. But
I'll tell you what, I've been enjoying the last couple of days here. I walk my dog Ches so much, but on the MP3 player has been our special guest today. All of the albums, including his most recent album, American Lullaby, which we'll talk a little bit. If anybody just got that hint, then you'll know who's going to be joining us. But been really enjoying all that work. But what do you got coming up IPO wise, my friend?
Well, I'm assuming this is Barry. Oh, very nice. Paul
Store. Nice.
Okay, cool. Well, we've got IPO Liverpool starting on the 28th. Rena and I head to the UK on the 26th, arriving the morning of the 27th. We can't wait, as always. IPO Liverpool, as great as they all are, IPO Liverpool is transcendent. And, we expect more of the same this year. We have 110 amazing acts from all over the world.
Wow.
We've got some really nice T-shirts this year. I'm very excited about that. And again, being in the Cavern for our 19th year, it's still surreal. It really is. And
Cavern Club and the Cavern Pub across the street.
Whatever else happens in my life, just knowing that this festival existed in the Cavern for all those years is going to be one of my biggest thrills, and I'll always be proud of that.
Hello, Gary from Texas. Nice to see you. Yeah.
So that there's that, and then Rena and I will take a little bit of a break. We'll go to Glasgow and Edinburgh for a few days, and then we head to Copenhagen, where we're doing IPO there for 2 days, two full days. And we've never been there, but there are some excellent bands from that area. And I think half of the bands we have at Copenhagen. Good evening, Andy. Half of the bands we have at Copenhagen are from the area or other places in Denmark, and the other half are from other parts of Scandinavia, mostly Sweden. We've got Cocktail Slippers from Oslo, and then we have Plastic Soul from the US. They're playing Liverpool as well, so they're piggybacking onto that.
So the Cocktail Slippers are coming over to Copenhagen for the IPO show. That's wonderful.
Yeah, it really is.
They're about to come out over here for a U.S. tour, I think, in November.
They are, and in fact, they are scheduled to play IPO Boston. They have an open date.
Nice.
When Boston is happening, they're going to be in the area. So there you go.
Let's
see what else we got here. Watch check. Got to do this one. This is one of the first watches I got when I got back into it. I was in Hamilton doing IPO, and I happened to pass a watch store, and I saw this. It was made by the owner of the store. His name's Sean Minden, and he made this really nice double. It's not really a tourbillon, but it's a double tourbillon-looking window. I'd never seen anything like it before. It's a moon phase, although it's a full moon now, so you're not seeing that. And unfortunately, it's lost a bit of its accuracy over the years, but you know what? That's okay, because I don't wear a watch more than a couple of days in a row anyway. So I just love the way this one looks. I really do. So we've got that. I was able to procure a few Hersh's ketchup flavored potato chips. I ordered them through Amazon. I'm going to have one right now. Just
a ketchup. You found ketchup potato chips from Hersh's?
I find one that has a lot of ketchup on it, but they were a little bit skimpy in these bags. I'm not sure why, but
well, you had told me. Go ahead.
You can see this one has a little bit on there,
and the verdict is
They are amazing. They
Well, you
are
told me
amazing.
your favorite ketchup chip is President's Choice out of Canada.
Yeah,
I don't know
President's
that brand.
Choice. They also do a ripple chip like hers, but they have so much more ketchup on it. Oh my god!
Oh, I
Also,
love it.
Doritos now has a ketchup flavored
Yeah. Yeah.
Dorito, which is really good and kind of spicy. Was guaranteed that it would make it out to this area.
So out of 10, what do you rate your Hers ketchup potato chips?
The hers are probably about a 7.
There you go. There you go, everybody. You've heard it
The
here of
President's
Material
Choice are
Issues.
a 10. The Lay's chips, which we've never had down here, and those you can get in Canada, they're probably about an 8.5, maybe,
Okay.
maybe a
All right.
9. I'm trying to think about. There are a few other brands. Canada has tons of them.
We
I
might
don't
we
know
might
why everybody thinks in Canada they like ketchup chips, but in California they wouldn't. But that's
well, they like those all dressed chips too, which is kind of like a conglomeration of everything called
yeah,
all
and that's
dressed.
not for
Yeah.
me. It's
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not into cheese. I'm not into sour cream. I'm not into dressings of almost any kind. So that those don't work for me, but they certainly do work for other people.
That's
Well,
awesome.
we could we could go on and on about chips, but this is not one of the shows where it's just us. We have a special guest, and
Yeah.
it's somebody of whom I've been a fan since 1977. And it's really interesting because I was a camp counselor. Good evening, whoever you are. Doesn't have your name. I was a summer camp counselor at a camp called Deerkill in Rockland County. And one of my campers, and this kid couldn't have been more than 11, his name's Brian Sachs. We're Facebook friends now. He became a musician, which was very, very cool. But he said, "Have you heard this song about Paramus Park and this girl and Channel 2 and all? It's so cool." And I said, "No, I haven't." And he didn't really remember the name. I mean, he was only 11 after all, but I got enough clues from him that I was able to figure it out and hear it on the radio. And it's like, wow, yeah, this is pretty cool. The song was Ariel, and it was a huge New York hit and was a pretty decently sized U.S. hit. Reached number 26 on Billboard and was on for the charts for quite a while, enough to
Yeah.
where, although it only reached 26 for a week, it was the number 87 hit in on Billboard in 1977 for the year. That's pretty impressive.
Yes, it is.
Usually a number 87 hit is something that reached the top 10, but this one had staying power. Probably a lot of it off the strength of on the strength of how well it did in New York. But it's a very New York area suburb kind of record. Yeah, it's just something I related to in so many ways when I heard it. And I've been a fan of his since. And my favorite album of his is his second one, Well Said the Rocking Chair, which contains a song called Lydia. Oh, hey, Nigel. Good to see you. It's been a while. Thank you for coming back. Ariel is a beautiful ballad.
Lydia is gorgeous as well.
I
One of
mean,
my
Lydia. I
favorites.
meant Lydia is a beautiful ballad.
Yeah.
I don't think of Ariel much of. It's a little bit more up tempo. Lydia is a beautiful, beautiful ballad with some very playful lyrics also. But it's intense. I love it. This man has continued to perform. He's released many, many albums over the years. He just got back from a tour of the UK, so he's still out there playing. I'm sure there'll be more new music from him in the future. And as far as I know, he's the only person to have the lyrics "extol the virtues" and "doo-doo" on the same album. I don't think anyone else will ever do that. Would you please give a huge Material Issues welcome to Mr. Dean Friedman?
There he is.
Hey guys. Hey Mark, David. Good to see you guys.
Good
Thanks
to see
for
you
having
too.
me.
Thank you so much for being on.
Can I just tell you, Dean, you don't seem to age. I don't know you personally. I've never met you before, but you popped up here, in our pre-show, and you look fantastic.
Looks exactly the same, yeah.
And I can tell your spirit is intact, and that's just wonderful. And you're out playing, and you're still touring, and you're still making music, and God love you for it, because you've given us so many years and great albums worth of music. Thank you, really appreciate it.
Well,
Ditto.
it's nice of you to say. It's just due to stubborn persistence.
Yeah. Well, you've also done so much of your work independently after the first album. Let's say, struggles with labels and things, with your crowdfunding of many of your albums, and been out there doing it your way, which is quite impressive. And we'll get into that as we get into your career a little bit. But
when you said your way, I was thinking of Have It Your Way, which made me think of McDonald's Girl. But we'll get to that.
That's a good segue.
Good segue.
I tried. How was the UK tour?
It was great. It's a little bit of a schlep getting across the pond, but they're always really enthusiastic and friendly audiences, so it makes it worthwhile.
Are there certain songs that they always scream out for?
Well, I've had different chart hits over there than I have had here, but they're just they just keep coming back, and so I'm appreciative of that enthusiasm.
Sure. And there must be enthusiasm from the audiences that draw you to places like the UK. Have you been into other countries over there as well? Spain, Germany, or has the UK been the primary?
I've done a few gigs in France, but the bulk of my touring has always been the UK and Ireland. Mm-hmm. I do a little bit here in the States on the on the coasts, but for whatever strange reasons, mostly to do with business and politics, I never had an opportunity to really consolidate a touring circuit in the U.S. In the way that I did over in the UK and Ireland, where I got, basically I just got a lot more airplay there, and I had a lot more chart hits.
What are you still in Peekskill right now?
Indeed, yeah.
Do you know
on the other side of the Hudson?
Yeah, right. Do you know a gentleman named Milton Walzer?
It's familiar, but I can't.
Okay, he's my cousin, so I thought.
Oh, okay.
Cool.
Next
you
time
don't know Milton?
I'll say hi.
I
know. And what was I going to say? I had a question for you with US. Do you have an agent that books you in the US? Are you kind of self-booking? Because for what you do and for what you've had on the charts and for what the fans here know, I just think that there's got to be a market out there for either you or to combine with somebody from that era as well, to play a lot of these smaller venues, the World Cafe stages and things like that. I think it would be wonderful. But
you'd think so, wouldn't you?
I mean, I do, and I've gone to see shows with people of that era and the ilk and that singer-songwriter kind of the type of thing, and it's been wonderful. The crowds have been huge, and I just I scratch my head when you say, well, I do a little bit on the coast, but I just I think I'm just gonna have to start booking your shows for you. That's it. Yeah.
Well, we can talk about it. Absolutely,
we can talk about that.
Dean, we've had one of your peers from back in the day, Walter Egan, he who had Magnet and Steel as a huge hit. He's played my festival many times. I know he still books his own shows, but it's totally within his control, and he loves doing it that way.
Yeah, we'll see. Maybe an IPO show. That'd be awesome.
God, well, that would be an honor, but we'll talk about that another time. For now, let me ask. I mean, your music all through the years. Some albums would have more, some have less, but there's always a bit of a coffee house jazz feel to a lot of your tracks. And I mean, was that your musical background when you were growing up, or was it more rock and roll?
David, it was eclectic. My mom was a singer and performer, on Broadway and in film, and there was always some Broadway show tune on the piano, and there was always some, aria or operetta on the record player, and So and those were some early influences. And then, of course, I got a transistor radio and started listening to all the top 40. And so my, influences really ran the gamut. I always had an affinity for, singer-songwriters like Joni Mitchell and Paul Simon, Randy Newman, James Taylor, Carole King, writers who were painting pictures with their words and music. And that's something that I always aspired to do from the very beginning, starting out, and still to this day.
Wow.
Do you remember what your first favorite song was?
My first favorite song?
Yeah.
Gee, well, it was an era where I was really, well, I mentioned those Broadway show tunes. We listened to West Side Story a lot.
Yeah, you can tell.
So Officer Krupke was a favorite. And just some of those lines in there, it just, for a little kid, they just cracked us up. And but then, as I say, getting a transistor radio, hiding it under my pillow when I was supposed to be asleep.
Yeah.
And hearing the Beatles and the Stones and Dylan and the Supremes and those all are major influences. On a kid just starting out, and you start out sort of initially imitating those influences, like aping like the Monkees.
Yeah.
And all the great songs that were written for them. And you learn 4 chords. I bought my first guitar with money from a newspaper route. And after playing those tunes, and then started writing my own tunes. And over time, you sort of find your own voice. And I have been doing that ever since.
What was the first song you wrote?
It was called Summertime. It went, I'd love to take a swim with you in the summertime. Oh, yeah, we'd swim so far in the ocean so blue in the summertime. Of course, I sang it about 2 octaves higher.
Yeah.
But it was a real learning experience because, I played it at the Paramus Boys Club camp.
Oh, wow.
And it's, most musicians, if they're honest, will tell you that, one of the big motivating factors is that, the opposite sex seems to be intrigued.
Sure. Yeah.
So,
I think so.
it didn't hurt. And and then when I started getting a couple of bucks to play a coffee house or a gig, I thought, well, this is great, getting paid to do something I like.
Yeah.
I'm still working on the getting paid part, but the rest of it fell into place.
Yeah.
Hey, it'll come. Yeah. It'll come. Keep throwing darts. That's what I tell my daughters, and sooner or later you'll hit the bullseye. Yeah.
So this is mostly happening in the early 70s, I would imagine. Is it all around Paramus or even in Manhattan? Excuse me.
I moved into the Bronx. I started going to City College when I was about 15. I got into an early admission program.
15? Wow.
Yeah, and moved into the Bronx a few months later. And so, I had some great teachers. I was, studying part of the Leonard Davis Center of Performing Arts. So was working with great musicians and teachers at CCNY. And in fact, that's where I met David Bromberg, the great, songwriter, Americana godfather, and singer-songwriter and instrumentalist and gunslinger guitarist. And David was doing a guest lecture at City College, curiously enough, on vocal pop music. And I just kept nudging him to listen to my songs. And finally he did. And, I guess he was impressed enough that he eventually introduced me to the folks who became my managers, the guys who ran the Bottom Line nightclub down in the Village.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And they took me to a small indie label, and they signed me right off the bat.
Wow. Now, who are these men? Are you talking about Cashman and West?
I am, yeah, Lifesong Records, and it was right after, sadly, Jim Croce had died, and unfortunately, the money from his life insurance policy gave them the resources to kick off this label.
Wow. At first, Lifesong didn't Lifesong eventually get picked up by Columbia as a distributed label?
Yeah, as part of the term where I was on them, CBS was picked up, but they were so annoying to CBS that eventually CBS dropped them as well. So it was a typical record company cliche, but I got my stuff out there, and it kicked things off for me.
Were you a guitar player from the beginning? Were you formally trained on guitar or piano? And is that your instrument of choice? Or...
it was split pretty much half and half, guitar and keyboards. I starting out, I felt a little more adept on guitar, but over the years, I guess I viewed them equally, and just it depends on what it is I'm trying to accomplish in terms of writing or arranging. And I play a little harmonica, little ukulele, whatever I can get my hands on.
Any synthesizers?
Well, yeah, a lot of synthesizers over the years.
On the third album, there's a lot of it, yeah.
Well, in around 1985, right around the time that MIDI exploded in the world of music synthesis,
right?
I had attended one of the Sam Ash Music Expos, and was really blown away by all these new keyboards that were coming out, drum machines, sequencers. It was a real new world. The first time they were integrating all these disparate electronic instruments and modules with computers to create, basically a music machine.
Right.
And I had been dropped by my label a few years prior to that, but I was spending time learning how to play the synclavier, the synclavier.
Wow.
And David Nichtern, great songwriter who wrote "Midnight on the Oasis" that was at the time the U.S. distributor for the synclavier. He had a studio in Manhattan, and I made a deal with him to rent time on the synclavier, because at that time it was the most powerful but also most expensive synthesizer on the planet. Okay. It cost about $50,000. So I couldn't afford one, but David Nichtern was kind enough to let me rent an hour just to fool around and educate myself on the instrument, which I did for weeks on end until I was pretty competent on it. And then by some coincidence, a phone call came into his studio looking for someone to write a book on synthesis.
Yep.
Yeah. Somehow the receptionist handed the phone to me, and I talked myself into a book deal and wrote what wound up being the very first consumer guide on sequencers, synthesizers, and drum machines by Music Sales. And following that, a book called Synthesizer Basics, which has been used over the years at leading music conservatories and universities all over the world.
Wonderful.
It's kind of where I was leading that question, because the book is fantastic, and you obviously had to get your hands on and know a thing or two about synthesizers. And
well, what was nice is that I was pretty ignorant starting out. All I knew was the most powerful synthesizer. But landing the book deal forced me to really do a really quick survey and understand what else was out there on the market. And I'm a quick study. And the fun part is that that every synthesizer manufacturer sent one of their keyboards or modules on loan to me over a period of 3 months while I was, researching the book. And every day, a UPS truck, a FedEx truck would show up with a brand new, synthesizer, a Roland or a Korg or a Kurzweil. I had barely had enough to skim through the manuals, but it was a great education. It was great fun.
Wow.
And the fact that I had come to it pretty naive meant that I was able to describe all of these instruments in layman's terms, which were very accessible to the reader. So the books became really popular. And the funny thing is, I did a series of videotapes, the Intro to Synthesis 1, 2, 3 by the New York School of Synthesis, which I founded at that time. And this was, 1986, 1987. Like 3 decades later, someone in Norway asked if they could post these videos on YouTube. And I said, sure. And they went viral. And now, a week doesn't go by that I don't get email from Moscow or Tokyo or, Australia, New Zealand, or anywhere really all over the planet from EDM producers, hip hop artists, synthesists of every ilk, extolling the virtues of the instructional videos. Because even though microprocessors have evolved over the decades, and these keyboards have become more and more sophisticated, the basic physics of sound has not changed one iota.
No,
so these quirky videos that I did in the mid '80s are still very contemporary and relevant to this day. And they're the go-to instructional videos for anyone that wants to learn about the new synthesizers.
Congratulations.
That's amazing. Were you a fan of late 60s lounge music, everything that was done with a lot of the Moog synthesizers?
Well, I was listening to everything. And like I said, my tastes and my musical preferences have always run the gamut and been really eclectic. So that was all good stuff. Although sometimes folks who hear my albums are surprised that there's not more synthesis on it. Although there's plenty of synthesizers and sampling, but I use them as just another instrument, another color and that musical palette.
With that in mind, sorry, I wanted to bring us back to when you got signed to Lifesong, because Cashman and West, you had to be somewhat simpatico with them. Listening to their music, it's sort of in the same ballpark. I mean, yours has a few more flourishes, again, more jazz flourishes, but the first album seems to have, kind of more like dressed up folk ballads, as well as a few up-tempo numbers. Very New York. It's very, very clear that your New York upbringing has had a profound effect on almost all of what you do, but especially the first 2 albums, I noticed that quite a bit. Had you written most of the songs for the album before they had demos before they had signed you?
I had. The only song that I wrote after they'd signed me before the album came out was Ariel, which became a hit right out of the box.
Especially in New York, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Was that song true to life for you? I mean, was it based upon an actual experience, or?
Well, like a lot of my songs, a lot of the elements and facets of it are true to life, and then I make ample use of my poetic license, which I always keep in my back pocket in case of I'm stopped for excessive alliteration or punning. And that's a poetic license is just an excuse. It's a nice way of saying I get to lie and make things up.
Right. Well, and there's a question for you that we ask a lot of our guests, because you're a very good storyteller. Your songs are stories. Are you a lyrics guy first, or are you a melody guy first? Do you get a melody in your head and then kind of work on the story and the lyrics after that, or are you writing a story and then trying to figure out the music after that?
Well, that's the classic question. Which comes
Yeah,
first?
it's a class. It is, and we
And
always get the answer like, "Well, it could come either way." But
yeah. And well,
I'm
I
always
gotta say
fascinated.
that's the only response is that the answer is it depends.
Yeah,
And for me, what keeps it interesting and fun is that every song is different. Sometimes it's a lyrical phrase that sticks in my head, or just an idea, a topic. Other times it might be a guitar riff or a chord progression or a beat, a rhythm figure that I am compelled to develop. And then
let's take Ariel for example. John Kirby had mentioned the falsetto parts were amazing in that song. He just popped up there with a comment. But did you have that in your head to and get up there before the music came, or did you have the story of Ariel and then you then worked on it? I'm just fascinated as to where that comes from as as the genesis of it.
I one afternoon I was left alone with a 4-track TIAC, and
I love this.
just exploring and experimenting. I started stacking vocals,
Okay.
and harmonizing with myself, and not knowing what key I was starting in. I started with that first line, and then I had to keep going higher and higher to harmonize it. And so that's how that chorus started. And then I just started telling a familiar story, about all these girls I had a crush on growing up deep in the bosom of suburbia. And, elements of it, there was a lot of reality to it. In fact, Tim Summer, the journalist, wrote a really nice piece, describing Ariel as the Great Gatsby of pop music.
Oh, wow.
Because it does sort of define a particular era and a particular place in time that's familiar to a lot of folks, like David.
Very much so.
Deep in the bosom of suburbia, and a familiar experience that a lot of folks related to.
Yeah.
I wish I could have related to it. I wasn't making love to anyone with bombs bursting in air or anything else at that point. So I was kind of jealous. Tell me what was the progression of Ariel becoming a hit? Who picked it up? Did a few AM radio stations, top 40 stations, pick it up first, and then it snowballed from there, or was it something else?
Well, a couple of strange things happened. One is that first they called me in and they said, we need to edit this down to make it shorter for a release as a single. And we also need to remove one of the lyrics. And I said, what are you talking about? And the heads of my label informed me that stations in the South would refuse to play it if I left the lyric that characterizes Ariel as a Jewish girl. And I thought that was insane and ridiculous. But they were insistent on it. I had to argue with them to keep it intact on the album. And, one of my big regrets is that I let them change it on the single. But, I was a new artist, just signed. This was the first single off the first album.
Wow,
and I had no leverage.
What does the single say? Because I've only had the album. I never actually had.
Well, fortunately, stations in the South refused to play the edited single. They wound up playing the
the album cut,
the complete intact album cut. But in the single verse, instead of "She was a Jewish girl, I fell in love with her," it's her name was Ariel. I fell in love with her. In fact, it was just a ridiculous.
Yeah, you should have probably said she was a KKK. That would have mollified everybody.
Stupidest thing in the world. And like I said, I had no leverage, but the best I could do was fight to keep it on the album intact, which it was. But you know what? When it was released, the Bottom Line nightclub got a call from the JDL, the Jewish Defense League, saying that they were going to boycott and demonstrate against the club and the label because of the edit. And although, the JDL since then has done a lot of really unpalatable stuff. In that
Yeah.
instance, they were absolutely right. There was no reason to cut it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I'm
So-
glad it
so
didn't
this-
work out that way.
This starts getting some attention and climbing the charts. How does it change? How does it change your life? Are you touring behind this, or at least regionally, or what went on with you?
It got a lot of help from WNEW-FM because they
Yes.
had a relationship with the Bottom Line nightclub. They were doing their simulcasts through WNEW-FM. So they were the first to play it, and at the time they were the number one FM station in the country, so that had a lot of influence. But the week that it came out, I was called onto the carpet by the record label saying, "Listen, we're getting complaints from NEW-FM. They say too many of your friends are calling the request lines asking for Ariel." And I laughed because I said, "Look, my friends are not calling requesting Ariel. There's actual people there." And it dawned on them after not too long that they had a real hit on their hands. The frustration for me, and I was aware of it even though I was a newbie starting out, is that Lifesong was such a small label and so incompetent in terms of their execution that they could not keep up with the demand for the pressings of the single.
Wow.
And as a result, you talk about its longevity and how it wound up being in that top 100, even though it was, 26 on Billboard. It went to 18 on Cashbox. But the reality is that it kept getting bullets in different territories around the country,
Right.
and then losing the bullets when they couldn't keep up with the stock.
Yeah, right.
And it was as simple as that. I've had numerous folks from major labels say that they had that single, that it would have been a number one, nationally. But in any case, it was number one in at least 30 territories all over the country.
Wow.
And not just to the Northeast, all over the country.
How did it do out in California? I didn't move here till 82, so I wouldn't know. But.
Well, there's an audience out there. That's why I play there. So,
it's amazing how something like that of keeping up with stock can change everything. As far as just where the album goes, where your career goes, where things go, and we hear these stories all the time that, well, it was just this, it's just that, but you're on a small indie label that didn't know what they were doing and weren't prepared to fulfill the demand, and wow, that's
it was frustrating.
Yeah.
The other thing is that I did not tour that much behind the single, and again, that was just down to the Bottom Line nightclub being so insulated within the bowels of their nightclub. It was, they would almost never leave without an oxygen tank because they were so accustomed to running their club.
Yeah.
So the mechanics of getting out there on the road, I did a little bit of touring on the East Coast. I did some dates in Florida with the Little River Band.
Oh, wow.
And that was great fun. But, they were one of the number one showcase nightclubs in the country. They could have used their influence to book me all over the country.
Sure.
But they never did. And so for whatever reasons,
did you have any TV appearances, American Bandstand or anything?
I did American Bandstand. I was on the Merv Griffin show with Buddy Hackett.
With whom? I'm sorry?
Buddy Hackett.
Yeah.
Oh.
And but even then, in terms of the logistics, not to gripe too much, but
it's the story. Yeah.
They, in the Merv Griffin show, because it's on camera, the musicians union requires a certain fee. And the Merv Griffin show wouldn't pay it direct. They insisted that the label pay it. The label didn't want to pay it, so that they wanted the management company, the Bottom Line, to pay it, or at least split it the amount. And the band that was on salary, including myself, I was getting $135 a week.
Wow.
While this record was going top 20. So what the guys at the Bottom Line Club insisted on doing is they wanted to claw back the on-camera TV fee that the musicians union required from the salaries of the band. And I said, guys, that's not right. You can't do that. And that was really the beginning of a falling out with the management company, because at some point, because I was insistent that the band get paid and keep the money that they earned for the TV appearance, they decided they were going to fire one of the band members who they thought was instigating this revolt. So they said, look, fire him or we're not going to manage you anymore. And I said, I'm not going to fire him. That's when they gave me my walking papers, because they were club owners. Everyone worked for them, and they never had a sense that they were working with me or on behalf of my career as management. They viewed me as an employee. Sure, and I just never bought into that, that mindset. That was, again, typical music industry cliche nonsense with management and label. But I was trying to do the right thing by the band.
Absolutely. I'm sure we'll never forget that.
There was no excuse for them to try and claw back that money from salaries of hardworking musicians that were not getting paid that much in the first place.
Well, let's talk about something a little happier. The next album, Well Said the Rocking Chair, which is way it just seems like a way more joyous album than the first one. A lot more up tempo, certainly a lot more whimsy going on, particularly in the lyrics. The deli song is something I'll certainly never forget, because I used to go to a few of the delis that you were obliquely referring to. Of course, Lydia, as I mentioned to you and to people in the introduction, always going to be one of my all-time favorite songs. I mean, I literally had tears coming from my eyes when I first heard it. It's just absolutely beautiful. But that album is generally just so much fun. Did you have a really good time doing it?
I did, and I appreciate you saying it and characterizing it in that way, differentiating it from the first album. But that again led to real difficulties with the label, because a lot of what you're characterizing about that album was the result of me doing the limited touring that I did with the band. It was we were in New York. It was an exciting time. There was there's always been a California sound and a New York sound in terms of studio musicians and the kind of groove and the kind of instrumentation and arrangements and that come out of those two different cities. I was really absorbing all the lessons of working with this New York band, and it was expressed on the second album. When I delivered the album to Cashman and West and their idiot associate, Phil Kernan, they sat me down and chastised me for a good half hour.
Wow.
Saying that they hated the second album, that I did a terrible job, that what they wanted was something nice solo acoustic like the first album, which was more up their alley. They just hated the second album. And I always knew they were kind of idiots. But that meeting confirmed it for me. When they told me what a terrible job that I did, that I was a spoiled artist, I wasn't listening to anybody, that I wasn't taking anyone's input, and it was going to be a disaster. So I just shook my head, because I knew that I had done really good work, and that as the band we had produced something of quality, and that they just were oblivious.
How deflating is that to get something like that in your pocket and then run in and be told that?
Well, it wasn't deflating in any way. because I was really confident in what I had done and what I had delivered.
Right.
It made me irate and incensed that these idiots were having such a significant role in terms of my career.
Right.
Fortunately, a week later, a telex came in, and that'll tell you what era we're in, because this was way before email, before faxes existed.
Yes.
We got a telex that the first release off the Rocking Chair album, a track called Lucky Stars, had entered the charts. And within a few weeks, it was number 3 record in the UK, and has since is considered a classic record on that side of the pond.
Yep.
And to this day, the label and management company were just scratching their heads. They couldn't understand how I would have a series of hits in the UK and a hit album that's considered a classic in the UK.
Do you know how did it happen? Who picked it up and started playing it?
It had nothing to do with Lifesong or the Bottom Line Management Company. They had a distribution deal with a small indie label called GTO Records.
Yes.
In England. That was headed by Dick Leahy, who went on to be a publisher for George Michael's and Wham. And he knew what he was doing. He was a smart, intuitive, capable guy that understood the music business. They serviced Radio 1, which is, in the UK, radio up until a few decades ago was very much government controlled national radio. And it was a huge hit right out of the box.
A very unique song, by the way. I mean, compared to what else was going on rock and roll albums at the time. I mean, a duet with a woman is, again, something that sounded like it could have been part of a Broadway review. And I always loved the back and forth that you had with Denise. Are you still in touch with her?
Now and then, sure. Yeah, we correspond. She's a fine songwriter in her own right, as well as having one of the best voices in pop music.
She really did.
But again, to illustrate how stupid my label was, when they put out the single, her name was not on it.
Right. Yeah.
It was on the album, but again, they just could not rap. They didn't want the single on the album. They said, "What are you putting a duet on this album? You're a solo singer-songwriter." And I said, "Look, it's a good song. People are going to like it. Just leave it on." That just again illustrates what fucking idiots they were.
I did not expect any of this. This is great. Not for you, but it was great.
It was frustrating because, again, even though I was still starting out, it was only my second album.
Right.
It was painfully obvious how just really incompetent they were. And at some point, it just, there was no alternative but to part ways with them.
I was going to say the realization had to be there that this was it. You had to go a different route for your career and your future and everything. You're just done. It's become a challenging path, but it also forced me to acquire the kind of independence that has enabled me to do things that I value and cherish as an independent artist. I like my life. I wouldn't mind having more money in the bank, but I can't complain. I get by, and I have a great family, and I get to make music and tour and do things that a lot of musician friends of mine would kill to be able to do.
Yeah, no, you're living the dream. I mean, as somebody who who's been doing this music festival that I do and knowing so many bands over the years who would love to be doing what you're doing. Some of them are, but most can't. I mean, they're boggled down by day jobs and whatever their family dynamic is, they really can't go out on tour. So they don't have the autonomy that you do. And, it's great that you're still able to do this.
Well, as I said at the beginning, David, it's stubborn persistence.
No, yeah, you need that.
And part of it came down really to the evolution of the internet. Because it was in about 2001. I had a bunch of songs. I was sitting in my treehouse, and I decided that I would compose a letter it was early days of the internet. And I had a small email list of about 1,000 people who were visiting my website and communicating. I decided I was going to send a letter. So I emailed everybody, say, look, I've got these songs. I need to upgrade my studio and pay musicians. So if you pre-order this album in advance, I'll have the money to make it and produce it. And I promise I'll deliver it within a year's time.
Mm-hmm.
And I was a little nervous thinking, oh, well, all these folks are going to say, Dean, why don't you get a proper job like everybody else? And some people did. Some people said that, Dean, I work for a living. Why don't you? But enough people were supportive of the idea that I was able to do it. Mm-hmm. And as far as I know, the only musicians that had done it prior on the internet was the band Marillion, who crowdfunded their U.S. tour and subsequent album. Just a few months before I crowdfunded my solo album, the Treehouse Journals. Mm-hmm. And I have been crowdfunding ever since. And, I'm grateful to my audience for making all that possible. Again, that's by virtue of the internet and, the democratization of the music technology. The fact that I was able to put together a small home basement studio for, not that much money, as opposed to the $2 million it would have cost to build a studio in the days of 2-inch reel-to-reel tape.
Well, I've been scrolling across the bottom here, deanfriedman.com. Just want to make sure everybody does see that, so they can point anybody who's interested towards your website. And it's a great website, all the history of everything you have done, and it keeps everybody informed of what's coming up. Do you have 2023 tour plans here in the U.S.? Anything else for the rest of the year?
I don't have anything on the book yet, although I usually do at least 1 or 2 New York dates and LA dates.
Please keep me apprised of the LA ones. If
sure.
I'm in town, I'll be there.
All right. Well, anyone on I'll put you on the email list and let folks know. I usually do something right around Groundhog's Day in the beginning of February.
That works for me.
At a really nice little club called Kulak's Woodshed in North Hollywood.
I know Kulak's very well.
Great place and
very cozy with all the couches and the beds, and they do a lot. They were one of the first clubs around here to do live streams of their shows, and they do a great job of it. I've gotten some really nice video from it, and Paul's a good guy and cares about the musicians and the music, which not every club owner does. Tell me about it. One of the more fascinating elements of your career was the whole half man, half biscuit thing. Tell everybody about that.
Sure. Well, Half Man, Half Biscuit are a legendary punk band from right outside of Liverpool. And Nigel Blackwell is the lead singer and songwriter, and just probably the finest lyricist in punk. It's just, he's got a sharp tongue, but he's also funny as hell. And so I was sometime in the 80s, I was preparing to head over to the UK to do a tour. And I got a call from a good friend in London named Andy. He said, Dean, something's going on here you need to know about. And I said, okay, what's up? He said, well, there's a band outside of Liverpool named Half Man, Half Biscuit. And I said, well, that's a funny name for a band. And he said, Dean, that's not the funny part. And I said, all right, what's the funny part? He goes on to explain. He says, well, they have a best-selling EP out, and there's a track on it that's titled The Bastard Son of Dean Friedman. Now, it seemed ridiculous to me, and so I figured he's just joking until I landed at Heathrow Airport to kick off a tour. And my friend Andy met me there with this EP in hand, and sure enough, fuck me, there was this song the title, The Bastard Son of Dean Friedman. At which point I became a little concerned. I'm Dean Friedman.
Yeah.
And
is there a bastard son?
Well, I grew increasingly concerned until I sat down and did the math. And I calculated, in order for me to have fathered this guy, Nigel Blackwell, I would have had to have done so when I was 7.
Yeah.
I was a
well, we know
precocious
you were
child.
proficient, but I don't. Maybe not quite that much.
Exactly, not that precocious. So I finally sat down and listened to it, and it's hilarious. It's a great tune. It's really funny as hell. And in fact, I urge your viewers to check it out. Go to YouTube, type in "The Bastard Son of Dean Friedman."
Awesome.
But even then, I swore that I would exact my revenge, and I did just that in a recent album where I wrote a song called "A Baker's Tale," which tells the true story of the dubious origins of one Nigel Blackwell of Half Man, Half Biscuit.
That's awesome. It's not as good as She Runs on Blood, Not Gasoline, but it's up there.
Well, yeah, that was fun too. That was I had been writing music for a TV series in the UK called Boone, which was a hit TV series about sort of a layman detective running around, rescuing fair maidens from distress and disaster on his motorcycle. And the folks who worked on the show, and as well as the cast and the whole crew, they spent off season doing a low budget horror film called "I Bought a Vampire Motorcycle," and they invited me to do the music for that, and it was great fun. And as you say, one of the tracks was "She Runs on Blood, Not Gasoline."
It's a good rocker.
I had great fun doing it, and you can catch it late night TV, or I'm sure it's somewhere on Amazon or Netflix. It's
have to look for it.
It's an example of one of those low budget horror films that has parts that are so awful that they're compelling. And you can't help it.
Well, we talk about that stuff all the time.
Kind of like if you remember Bad Ronald. Do you remember that with Scott Jacoby? It was one of those 70s TV movies that was just so awful it was great, and it's developed a cult following more or less based on that whole idea of like this was terrible, but terrible in the funniest of ways.
I had a lot of fun doing it.
Yeah.
An American Lullaby was your last release in 2021.
Yeah.
With a great opening. That opening track, American Lullaby, is just another. I love the vocal. It's a lower register kind of sing for you, but great lyrics, great melody. The whole album is fantastic. Do you got some things in the works for the next crowdfunding?
Well, I just got off the road just a few days ago, so I need a little while to decompress.
Maybe a day or two, yeah. Then we want you back on it, yeah.
That sounds like the opening lyric right there. I just got off the road a few days ago. I need a few hours to decompress.
It could work, but I'm nowhere near ready to retire, and I definitely have some more albums and books in me to foist out into the world.
Have you played the Cavern?
On numerous occasions, yeah.
Oh wow.
Oh, nice.
And so that's always a lot of fun.
Well, we usually do our festival in Liverpool in mid-May. We moved it to late May this year because of the Eurovision Song Contest. We didn't want to get in the way of that.
Yeah, I know. There's a lot of competition for that night.
That would have been a little too. Plus, the hotels were going for like £1,000 a night. So, but anyway, we're usually in the middle of May. So, if somehow your touring schedule in the UK aligns with what we're doing, maybe we can arrange to have you there. It would certainly be an honor of mine.
Well, we'll stay in touch, definitely, David.
Definitely, absolutely.
Nice. Well, absolutely fascinating to have you here, Dean. We pride ourselves here, Material Issues, in pulling out a lot of our favorite artists from the 60s and 70s and tracks that, as David alluded to, you hear it, it takes you right back to a moment in time and a place in time, and it's a wonderful feeling. And you were a part of my mid to late 70s musical experience, and I thank you for that. Just wonderful, and following everything you've done since then. Thank you for the music, Dean. We really appreciate your work.
Very much.
Well, thank you for the kind words, guys. And as in terms of your viewers and listeners, if you're curious about what I'm up to, you're invited to visit that website right under the scroll. And send me an email, and I'll send occasional updates about new recordings, and gig alerts, and tour announcements, and occasional rants and raves from this independent musician.
Where can one get Dino's Demos Volume 1?
From my website. Yeah, and you can get almost all my albums from my website, except the first album, which the copyright won't revert back to me until 2033. But I am,
it's something to look forward to.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Now we thank you, Tim Allen, checking in, saying it was a great interview. It really was, Dean. Best wishes for everything in the future. Stay happy, stay healthy, stay grateful. We'll look forward to possibly seeing you here on the East Coast live, and we look forward
and the West Coast, hopefully.
And the West Coast. Yeah,
absolutely.
Look forward to everything you do in the future. But thank you again for joining us here in Material Issues. This has been a real thrill.
Absolutely. It meant a whole lot to me. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, guys. Have a good one.
Have a great night. Thank you, Dean. Well, there you have it, my friend, Dean Friedman.
That was a lot. That was a lot of fun. I mean, again, this is like a dream come true for me, and I'm sure for you. I mean, growing up, listening to these artists, I mean, they were in the stratosphere for us. I mean, whether or not they had hits, looking in the late 70s, all the albums that I was buying, the idea of like getting to know, I mean, I'm still 18, 19. I mean, the idea of getting, and these musicians, a lot of them are in their mid 20s, but even that seems like light years ahead of me. Yeah. And the idea of getting to know any of them, just seemed unfathomable.
Right.
And so I like you, when some of your favorites are on, I just go back to being a fanboy. I can't help it. Yeah. Even though I realize, now in many ways we're all peers. I go back to that, wide-eyed 18-year-old who heard Ariel and thinking, wow, this is an amazing song. And then as a 19-year-old hearing Lydia and just like falling in love. So yeah, it really means a lot when these
what I find really fascinating though is how humanizing it is to do these interviews and talk to these people, because as you said, when we were in the mid to late 70s and we're buying the music or we're hearing this stuff, we're these people were on a platform. These were stars. These were unobtainable.
Even if they weren't stars,
but they really, even if they weren't stars, but it was an unobtainable thing to be meeting and talking, and then we do these interviews and their struggles were the same as anybody else's, and in many ways, a guy like Dean, he had a top 100 hit there in Ariel and finished 87, 26. He was barely getting by via the label, and
it's amazing how many stories we hear like this.
Yeah,
Dean seems to be a little more forthcoming and direct about his feelings about the matter.
The fucking idiot.
Everyone else, I mean, they registered their disappointment, but They weren't going as far as to say their label people were idiots. But,
Yeah.
but he's not wrong. Many of
He's
them
not
were.
wrong. Yeah, he's not wrong.
And we as listeners back then, we weren't privy to any of this.
You
We
didn't
had
know.
no idea why what happened.
Yeah. Which is what I find fascinating about these stories is, we think of it in one way, and quite often it's very different than what we imagined it had to have been for them.
Yeah, well, we're learning quickly with, especially with these, these people who had major label records in the 70s. Wow, it's
crazy. It's absolutely crazy. But
speaking of that, I just thought of this because I want to say it live.
Yeah,
also.
Yeah.
Big shout out to Big Stir Records.
Oh my gosh, yes.
They just had 6 new signings, one of whom was indeed somebody who had major label records in the 70s. And, he's still revered today by many people who love pop and rock and roll. Graham Parker. What an amazing signing.
Is that wonderful? Yeah. That's great.
That's real. So kudos to them for that. And I certainly look forward to Graham's new album on Big Stir. They also signed The Circle, who are going to have a new album. Now that I certainly didn't expect. Yeah. That's another major label band from the 60s, of course, had 2 albums on Columbia. And, of course, a top 5 hit with a Red Rubber Ball. Yeah. But, maybe one day we'll have, maybe Graham or Don Danneman from The Circle or somebody from the band on Material Issues. And we'll see what their stories were, if they even want to tell us. Graham was on, he was on Mercury for a while, and of course he had the song Mercury Poisoning. So
Mercury Poisoning, yeah.
Clearly he was not happy with certain aspects of how the label was run, how they treated his records. It's almost like everybody we talked to just had a really lousy experience. I think part of it is that they had certain expectations, when they were younger, about being a big rock star, being rich and wealthy with girls all over them, and Lear jets and 5-star hotels and everything else. And then they go into it and they find the very hard black underbelly of what's going on. Right. And it's not fun. It's a rude awakening. And then they get an even ruder awakening sometimes when they're let go from the label. And it's like, guess what? You owe us money.
Yeah, right. Oh, yeah.
Those tours you did, the hotel rooms you did stay in, those pencils you bought.
Here's the bill you got to cover before we pay you anything.
Your albums didn't sell enough for us to recoup those expenses. Yeah. So guess what?
Oh,
you owe us money. And it's like, what the hell? So many of these people went into it not knowing anything about what was going to happen.
Right.
It's got to be such a rude awakening.
And what's interesting is because we're talking to a number of our guests who are well past that now.
Yeah.
They become a little more open to say, yeah, well, this A&R guy was a fucking idiot. Or whatever it may be.
I have to admit, we haven't heard. We talked to a few people like John Jones of Fringe Benefit, and Lowry Hamner of the Criers, and a few other people who had records on major labels, and they weren't. They were forthcoming in their their not so much their antipathy, maybe their discouragement about what was going on. But Dean was very forthcoming in his antipathy.
Yeah, I'm sure.
It's and I can imagine that back then he probably said it to their face.
Yeah.
He probably said, "You guys are fucking idiots." Which is something I'm sure a lot of people didn't say to their label people. But hey, this has been an awakening for us also.
Sure.
You read stories and you think, well, it may have happened to a few people, and now we're finding out it's pretty much happened to all of them.
Everybody.
And I imagine even some of the big stars, obviously the Beatles had their issues. The Beach Boys had their issues. I'm sure Michael Jackson had his. As huge as he was, there were probably things that he didn't expect either, and disappointments. Yeah, it's. I don't know. Well,
it's been enlightening. It's been a lot of fun. as we discussed over the last 2 years, it's been great archiving these stories.
It really has. I'm glad they're still
and
available for
yep,
anybody who wants to see them
and
on
that's kind
Facebook
of
and YouTube.
that's kind of what when we approach artists, musicians, actors, authors, whatever it may be. That's kind of one thing I talk about is like, yeah, we'd love to get your story archived. Always, it'll be out there and be told. And David and I are, we're a lot of fun to talk to, and you'll enjoy it. And I think everybody really does have a good time.
And speaking of artists that were on major labels, our guest next week is one of those. We have next week, and it's only apropos that this gentleman be on our show because we basically named it after his band, Material Issue. And yes, it's bass player Ted Ansani of Material Issue will be our guest next week, the 24th of May, possibly with Mike Zelenko, the drummer. I don't know. I asked Ted if he would talk to Mike about perhaps appearing with him, but either way, it's fine. Now they were on Mercury Records as well. I don't know if they had mercury poisoning like Graham, but
we'll find out.
It'll be interesting to see what their experience was in the 90s. I mean, the dynamic at major labels was somewhat different in the early 90s as it had been in the 70s. I don't know if it was any more benevolent, but I guess we'll find out. Because they were on the label, then they weren't. We'll see exactly what happened there, as well as all kinds of other things, Material Issue related. Of course, Jim Ellison, the great Jim Ellison, and also what Ted has been doing over the last few years with some of his other bands, like the Ted Ansani Project and other things he's been doing. So that should be a lot of fun.
Oh, it's going to be great. Yeah.
Beyond that, the following week, I will be in Liverpool doing IPO at the Cavern Club. So we're on the 31st. We're definitely scheduled to do a live broadcast from there. And last year we did it. It was a bit choppy, but I think the essence was presented pretty well. People got to see a performance. They got to go into the dressing room and hear from bands who had played and were about to play. I did a little tour of the backstage, showing the memorabilia. Unfortunately, the Wi-Fi didn't work well enough for me to go into the front stage and keep the connection. Maybe that's changed. I don't know.
Maybe it'll be maybe they got a little bit better Wi-Fi feed.
Well, last year was the best they'd ever had, and prior to that, we could never have even done what we did.
I think it'll be fun. That'll be 2 weeks from 2 weeks from now. You'll be live from the Cavern, and we're going to see what we can do. I think it'll be really cool if we can get it going live and talk to some people and see some our acts going on. Yeah.
We certainly have other irons in the fire. We'll see what transpires in the weeks following.
Always do, yeah.
Well, I remember last year, the following week, it was I believe it was just you and me, to quote Chicago, me from my London hotel.
Yeah.
This time it'll be from my Glasgow hotel. Yeah, we'll be in Glasgow the following week. Like I said, relaxing between IPOs. So we'll see if we have a guest for that, and if we don't, I'm sure I'll have enough to talk about.
That's right, Andy.
Yes, you did.
Yeah. You'll be live from Glasgow. Maybe that's when we'll have some of the rollers on. We'll see if we can convince them to get.
Yeah, there you go. Or maybe
Edinburgh, Glasgow. Wonderful. But now I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to next week with Ted Ansani. I'm looking forward to live from the Cavern Club. And again, if you haven't joined us here on the Facebook group, join the group. Subscribe over at YouTube. Tell your friends about it every Wednesday, usually, except for a couple of things. Sometimes we do it on a different night, but 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific. It's Material Issues, and this was episode number 103. Everything is archived on Facebook and YouTube. Go back and watch them. And we love when you join us live. We love when you drop us comments. It just makes it that much more fun for us and the guests. So we hope you're digging it, because you're all our friends, and we're having a great time doing it.
We really are, and we're very, very grateful to everybody who tunes in either regularly or sporadically whenever you can.
Yeah.
And it's always nice to have people there with us when we're doing this.
Mhm.
We often get great questions. It just has more of a familial vibe. I mean, obviously people are free to watch it on archive, and we hope you do if you can't make it live, but always, tell your friends. The more the merrier. It's always fun.
Awesome. Well, David, have a great night. Again, great get, Dean Friedman. Wonderful interview, and
really
another one for the Material Issues books. And
absolutely, and we look forward to 10. Thank you, Andy. We look forward to 10 on Sunday next week, and then of course Liverpool the following week, and everything else that comes beyond. So everyone stay safe this week. Well, always, but in the immediate future this week, and we will see you next Wednesday.
Have a great night, everybody. David, have a wonderful one. Love to Rena. See ya.
Well, thank you, Mark. You